Thanks, Kate, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. Um, I'm speaking from Wollongong, New South Wales, which is the traditional land of the Darrabal people, the home of the cabbage tree palm tree, and I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. To do justice to the eco-arts in Australia and abroad in 10 minutes is probably impossible in 10 minutes. So I thought what I would do is synthesize it down to three pathways through which the arts can promote pro-environmental behaviour, drawing on examples from some of the conferences that we've organised over the last few years, as well as case studies from my own research. There's three pathways I think that the arts can promote pro-environmental behaviour. The first is through communicating information, whether that's increasing a cognitive interest in nature or provoking emotional indignation about degradation. The second pathway is where the arts create an empathy, an emotional affinity to nature. And the third pathway is where the arts are built into or catalyse ecologically sustainable development. And I would like to focus on two areas of this: transformative action, where the arts are part of restoration projects or other types of ecological sustainable development projects. So the first pathway, creating a cognitive interest in nature, there's lots of examples, particularly in environmental education, where the arts have been used to create interest or knowledge about the environment. This is an example from our last conference, the Tree Veneration Society based in Sydney, who they run these fantastic workshops, among other things, that incorporate science, but also a lot of art to educate the public and children about the value of trees in our landscapes. An example of where the arts has been used to create an awareness of the consequences of our action is Leapfish, a company that has run big programs with schools to focus on energy consumption, water consumption. They build in performance into their workshops, heavily influenced by circus and magic, and then they run these workshops with the kids. And they measured 3 months after their programs, they measured 15% decrease in daily electricity consumption and 11% reduction in daily water consumption of the families of the children that participated in those workshops. I'm sure many of you can think of artworks that evoke indignation about degradation. This was an amazing example from our last conference, brought by Jill Sampson, an artist in central Queensland. She wanted to highlight the problems of the Bimblebox Nature Reserve, which is right in the middle of a coal mining area and is a home of 153 bird species. She brought together 450 artists to produce this incredible travelling exhibition of visual and audio artworks to promote, highlight and to raise awareness about the plight of that nature reserve. So the second pathway is where the arts create empathy for the natural environment, and I'm sure all of you would have pictures on the wall, or there's music or performances that has inspired your love of nature. This was a nice example from our last conference of an ephemeral art project of several artists in the southern Moreton Bay area. When we think of pro-environmental behaviour, it's predictable by what people know about the environment, about nature, and the level to which they're indignant about degradation. That makes sense, but it's been found that an emotional affinity towards nature is as important a predictor of pro-environmental behaviour as these other factors, and so art of this type is important to shift people's attitudes. The third pathway is where the arts are part of catalysing ecologically sustainable development. This is an example of an ecological restoration project in Armidale, New South Wales. It's been taking place for many years along a gully through Armidale. And each year there's a big music festival there. And as part of one a couple of years ago, EcoArts Australis commissioned 4 ephemeral artists to create ephemeral artworks to be placed within that restoration project. And there's other similar examples have come to some of our recent conferences. And this is another example where the arts have been embedded in ecologically sustainable development. The artist Claire Tracy, who works with several different big organisations, she makes these extraordinary sculptures out of plastic waste. This is one that she did in collaboration with Melbourne City Council. And she also did another project with Flight Centre, and over 6 months was collecting all this plastic waste and making these extraordinary sculptures, and in the process actually shifted the whole behaviour of that company towards its rubbish, minimising its rubbish. In this context, I also wanted to mention celebrationist events. These are events that I define as involving multiple art forms, large numbers of community participants, and a celebratory in their nature in terms of the relationship of the human's relationship to nature. This is one of the big case studies that I looked at as part of my own research. It was an ecological chorale called Plague in the Moonflower that was staged by the Armidale community. Something like 300 participants, audience of 10,000 people, and among other things, we created this enormous puppet, 6 metres high, out of 3,000 plastic shopping bags. When I went to survey the audience and participants, 74% of the survey respondents said it made them reflect about humanity's relationship with the natural environment. Something like 2/3 of them said it made them want to change their behaviour. So these events are really important, I think, as part of EcoArts practice. Also, the arts as an industry is an industry with high embodied labour and low embodied energy. Barney Foran and his associates did this incredible study a few years ago where they looked at all the different sectors in the economy, and the arts as an industry has relatively low greenhouse gas emissions when compared with other sectors of the economy, and low water use, land use disturbance, but relatively high employment for the level of production that it produces. So to give you a bit of some graphs on this, the arts as a component of GDP. You can see it as an industry, it's as big as the meat products industry and the sheep and shorn wool industry and the structural metal industry in terms of what it contributes to GDP. This is it compared with all the other sectors of the economy in terms of its employment creation, its intensity of employment. So you can see it's a relatively high employer, and it's a relatively low greenhouse gas emitter. So if you're a policy person or a government interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the arts is a sector of the economy that you'd be encouraging. And that's highly relevant in the conversations that we're having in Australia at the moment. So I'd like to just reflect now just on a few trends that we've noticed after running these 3 conferences over the last several years. There's many individual artists that practice eco-arts, environmentally themed work, whether it's to create empathy for nature or to communicate or provoke indignation. But what we've seen, I think, increasingly is these multi-artist collaborations. So several of the case studies that I've already mentioned this morning were multi-artist collaborations. This is another one from our last conference, which was a multi-artist collaboration with the Artist in Residence Science Program with the Queensland Government. This group of artists worked with a group of scientists who are studying this erosion problems, and they include visual artists, performing artists and poets who produce this beautiful body of work around that. And this collaboration with scientific organisations is also something that we're seeing a lot of increasingly, whether it's individual artists or groups of artists working with individual scientists or groups of scientists, scientific organisations or other organisations such as councils and corporations. This was a nice example from one of our previous conferences between an American ecologist, Nalini Nadkarni, and a dance company, Jodie Lamask. And finally, the third trend we're seeing, particularly within Australian eco-arts practice, is the inspiration from Indigenous ways of seeing, whether that's through direct involvement of Aboriginal artists or whether it's non-Indigenous artists working with Aboriginal communities to create the work. And this is an example from an artist in Melbourne, Catherine von Wilgenberg, a big land art project she did as part of an ecological restoration project there, and she works closely with Aboriginal communities in her practice. So that's it from me. I hope that gives a useful overview, a framework to view the arts, and I'll be happy to participate in the questions later in the morning. Thank you.